You think science always has limits, until someone decides to ignore them. A group of volunteers entered a hidden research facility believing they were joining a harmless sleep study for easy money. 7 days inside. No outside contact, no danger. That's what they were told. But before the week ended, people inside started hearing whispers no one else could explain. One volunteer died violently, and the survivors became terrified of one thing more than death itself: sleep. Tonight on The Dark Brief, this is the story of an experiment that was supposed to study the human mind, until the people running it realized they had pushed it way too far. And before we begin, subscribe to The Dark Brief and leave a like, because stories like this only get darker the deeper you go. The facility sat far away from any city, hidden underground beneath an abandoned military property. The people working there avoided real names. Volunteers gave up their phones, watches, and personal belongings before entering. One of those volunteers was Daniel Reeves, a broke college dropout who only joined because he needed money badly. $10,000 for 1 week sounded worth it. At first, everything felt normal. The volunteers had clean rooms, food, books, and cameras watching them at all times. Researchers told them the experiment focused on sleep deprivation and mental performance. Then, on the second day, the researchers introduced a special gas into the ventilation system. They claimed it would help the brain stay awake longer without damage. The volunteers agreed. For the first day without sleep, everyone felt energetic. People talked constantly, laughed more, and stayed active. But after 2 full nights awake, things started changing. One subject claimed he heard whispering sounds coming from the air vents. Another became paranoid and accused the others of hiding secrets from him. Daniel tried ignoring it, but even he started feeling strange. Every sound became louder. Every thought became harder to control. Still, the researchers continued the test. By the 4th day, the volunteers looked completely different. Nobody joked anymore. Most sat silently staring at walls for hours. One man smashed a mirror because he believed his reflection was moving incorrectly. The researchers wrote everything down, calmly, like it was normal. Daniel later said the worst part wasn't the hallucinations. It was the silence. No sleep meant no mental rest. Their thoughts never stopped. Fear kept growing every hour. Then something happened that terrified everyone inside the facility. Late one night, every volunteer suddenly stopped moving at the exact same moment. Nobody spoke. Nobody blinked. They all stared toward the ventilation system like they were listening to something hidden inside the walls. Then one volunteer started laughing. Seconds later, all the others joined him. The sound echoed through the entire chamber. Even the security guards became uncomfortable. The lead scientist believed they were close to some kind of breakthrough, so instead of stopping the experiment, he increased the gas dosage again. That decision destroyed everything. On the next day, one volunteer violently attacked another subject during breakfast. Guards rushed inside, but the injured man later died from his wounds. At that point, the remaining volunteers begged to leave. The researchers refused. Then suddenly, the power inside the facility failed for several minutes. Emergency lights turned on, and for the first time since the experiment began, the gas stopped flowing. That's when the volunteers panicked, not because they were finally free from the gas, but because they wanted more of it. They screamed at the staff to turn it back on. Some cried, others slammed themselves against locked doors. One volunteer kept repeating the same sentence over and over, "Don't let us sleep." The researchers realized something horrifying. The subjects believed sleep itself was dangerous. Medical teams entered the chamber to remove the volunteers safely, but the moment the doors opened, chaos exploded. One subject attacked a guard with terrifying strength. Another injured himself just to stay awake. Daniel escaped briefly into one of the dark hallways during the confusion. Later, he claimed he heard footsteps following him every time the lights flickered, but whenever he turned around, nobody was there. The surviving volunteers were eventually restrained and isolated. Doctors tried sedating them, but even heavy drugs barely worked. Then one researcher interviewed Daniel privately. At first, Daniel sounded exhausted but calm. The doctor asked why the subjects became violent after the gas stopped. Daniel stared at him for several seconds before answering, "Because sleeping lets them in." The doctor asked who they were. Daniel smiled slightly and whispered, "They were always here." After that interview, fear spread through the facility itself. Several staff members began hearing whispers too. One guard quit immediately after claiming he saw a figure standing in a dark hallway that disappeared seconds later. Nobody knew whether the subjects were hallucinating or whether the fear itself was spreading to everyone around them. The researchers finally decided to shut Project Echo down completely. Every remaining volunteer would be sedated and transferred out of the facility. But before that could happen, the subjects escaped containment. Alarms filled the underground halls late at night. Security teams searched every room but found the cells empty. Minutes later, cameras detected movement on the lowest level of the facility. An abandoned section no one used anymore. Armed guards moved downstairs expecting violence. Instead, they found every surviving subject standing silently in complete darkness, facing a single concrete wall. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. One guard stepped closer and heard scratching sounds coming from inside the wall itself. Then all the subjects slowly smiled at the same time. Panic erupted. Gunshots echoed through the underground halls as guards opened fire after one subject suddenly charged forward screaming. When backup teams finally secured the area, most of the volunteers were dead. But Daniel Reeves was gone. No body was ever found. Within 2 days, Project Echo officially disappeared. The facility shut down. Staff members signed confidentiality agreements. Records vanished. For years, the entire story sounded like another internet conspiracy theory, until leaked documents began appearing online. The files included medical reports, security notes, and disturbing interview transcripts from inside the experiment. One line from the final report shocked people the most. The subjects displayed identical hallucinations despite isolation. Think about that carefully. Hallucinations are usually different for everyone. So why were multiple people hearing the same whispers? Why were they all terrified of sleep? Some experts believe the experiment simply caused extreme psychological damage through sleep deprivation and chemical exposure. Others think the volunteers became victims of mass paranoia. But one detail still disturbs people online today. When investigators later searched the abandoned facility, they reportedly found the same sentence carved repeatedly into several walls. "They wake up when we don't sleep." Nobody knows who wrote it. Daniel Reeves was never officially located after the experiment ended. Years later, rumors claimed a tired-looking man entered a remote gas station before sunrise and asked the cashier a strange question. "Do you ever hear whispers before falling asleep?" The cashier nervously said no. The man reportedly replied, "Then they haven't noticed you yet." Then he walked away. Maybe the story was fake. Maybe Project Echo never happened at all. But what makes stories like this terrifying isn't just the mystery. It's the possibility that somewhere someone really believed human minds could be pushed beyond their limits and ignored what happened afterward, because history has already proven something dangerous. Once people believe an experiment is important enough, they stop caring how far it goes. And maybe that's the scariest part of all. If you made it this far, comment "awake" below. And share this video with someone who loves dark mystery stories, because this one stays in your head long after the video ends. Subscribe to The Dark Brief for more disturbing stories that blur the line between reality and nightmare. And tonight, if you suddenly wake up hearing something whisper in the dark, try not to listen too closely.